Hello and welcome to another episode of Real Talk. It's been a while, but we're back. I'm your host, John Walker, and with me as always is Norm Wergler.
Here I am.
How are you today, sir?
Doing great. Let's get going.
We are going to jump right in because we've got a lot to cover today. We're talking about car chases. These aren't necessarily all car chase movies. They're movies that have cool car sequences, yes, or just interesting or maybe industry-changing sequences involving cars or some other vehicles.
And the cinematography that's used in those instances.
Yes.
We chose Grand Prix for that reason.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's more of a race film, but we'll get to that when we get there. The first film we're going to talk about today is a classic called Thunder Road, starring Robert Mitchum. And this is a movie where he is a ex-Marine who comes home and gets into the moonshining business with his family.
Good business.
Yes. Well, at the time, it was
white lightning.
Yes, very profitable business, yes. And they are modifying their cars to make them fast and to get away from police. And so he has a special modification he does in this scene that helps him get away from some gangsters. So let's jump right in and take a look at this clip and look at Thunder Road. It was a pretty intense scene, especially for 1958.
It never ends well for the villain, does it?
No. It almost seemed like the car was rigged to blow, but it went a little early. But I think that almost made it seem more realistic. The interesting thing I thought, too, was the music really kind of drove the pacing of the scene. Whenever the intensity kicks up, the music kicks up as well.
Except that one middle section where it sounded almost like a carnival. Did you notice that?
Mm-hmm.
The use of the electric guitar, it gave that kind of a harpsichord sound. And when we look at Jack Marshall, who did the music for this, he did the movie for the music for several of the Munster TV series, and it had that kind of playful quality about it. But then it came back in and got intense again after the shot went through the window vent there. And he also did the music for the Giant Gila Monster, which someday we'll talk about that movie too.
It was. I was actually surprised at this movie. I had never seen it until I reviewed it for the show, and I thought it was really good. I mean, I know that I'm just from a different time. I was born later, and it's hard for me to go back and watch stuff because it just seems like a much slower pace than movies are nowadays. But this one, I was completely entertained the whole time. I thought it was a really good story, and the car chases were really good too.
Right, I'd like to see more people see this one. When I mentioned it to some of my friends that we were going to be talking about this film, said, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing that movie with Robert Mitchum." So it's been on television a few times as well. In fact, it was just on recently. That's what happened to happened to pop into my head. And the directors of photography, the DP, David Ettinson and Alan Svensvold, they had done quite a few movies of that ilk from the 50s and early 60s. So that's fun. And of course, your modification, we got to point that out.
Yeah, that was a really cool. I mean, that was pre-James Bond.
Pre-James Bond, yes.
That was very that was very slick.
Yeah, very. Oh, I was hoping you wouldn't say that.
Well, speaking of 60s, we're going to jump into the 1960s with the film Grand Prix. And this is not really a car chase film. This is a film about a race.
Right. The Grand
where
Prix.
cars are chasing one another to see who wins. But the thing that was interesting and what we chose about this film, I'd never seen it until you had recommended it to me, was a lot of the cinematography in this and the sequences, especially what we're going to look at for the clips is the title sequence that has a lot of really neat visuals that go along with preparing for the race.
It uses a lot of split screen. The DP uses a lot of split screen. And Frankenheimer was bold with this. They went to the actual race, and the day before, they had the actors driving around the racetrack, and then they filmed the whole race later on with a few cars where they agreed to have cameras mounted to them. And Lionel Linden, who did the photography for this, the cinematography, was really very creative in how he mounted cameras down in the suspension system. There are times when you feel like you're part of the race, you're part of the car, and of course the sounds are amazing, the sounds these cars make. And one of the things I'd like to point out is this is the sort of thing you wouldn't do in a theater, pay attention to what's not happening, you know. So I thought it would be interesting to point out you've got all this action going on, and just before the race starts, all we hear is the thump, thump of the heartbeats. And it's really neat.
All right, well, let's take a look at that. Sure. Let's look at Grand Prix from 1966. That's pretty intense. That does a good job of putting you in the race. And one thing before we go on, I'd like to mention that I didn't mention at the top of the show is that all of these sequences you're about to see have been edited for television because they were just too long. We would have to do 10 episodes of this show to be able to get them all in. So we edited them down to a manageable amount so we could give you, the viewer, a pretty good taste of what you would be seeing if you watch this film. But they did an amazing job at editing this. Saul Bass, who it said was credited with the montage and visual titles, I'm sure he had his hand in a lot of the interesting visual things that they do in this. And I think that after seeing this, I noticed that watching this movie was a lot like watching a car race you would watch today on television. Because a lot of the angles that you were talking about that they sort of pioneered in this film were what you would see if you flipped over to watch a NASCAR race or something. You're down on the ground, low angles around the bend. You're seeing all types of different, we didn't get an in the car in this film too much, but you get all these different inner workings of the vehicle and of the race to kind of give you, the viewer, more of a experience of being there.
Oh yeah, and the other thing is, we had talked about this before, there are some of the movies we're going to be talking about, some of you may have seen, but many of you may not have seen. This is one I would encourage you to see. We had to edit it, or you had to edit it, because we're cutting away from the race and we're looking at the lives of the participants as well, and the various subplots going on. And so this is going on during the race. The other movie that we couldn't use today is the Le Mans with Steve McQueen. Another one that has interesting racing sequences, but it's just too long for us to do here. So we'll just encourage you to go find it and watch it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Every film that we're doing is, they're very action-packed, so there's a lot of violence in some of these films, so viewer discretion advised if you're going to go out and actually view these. You may not want to watch them with your kids, but they're all entertaining, and everything you're going to see today is completely safe for TV. So saying that, let's go to our next film with, speaking of Steve McQueen, we're on to Bullitt now.
The iconic car chase.
This is a very cool car chase, and I think the villain's car in this film is a black Dodge Challenger, which is going to become a very popular car that we're going to see in today's sequences. But this film is a very good movie where Steve McQueen is a cop hired to protect somebody. They get killed, and then he's on the sort of the chase to try to find the murderers who he's actually chasing in this scene we're about to watch now. So let's take a look at Bullitt. That end shot with the gas station exploding.
Gruesome.
It's pretty intense. I mean, you see they use some very realistic dummies as well to show the actual villains being burned in the fire. And this is still 1968. This is still, there's not a lot of gory violence in film yet. But it's getting there. I've noticed that as we progress through, you can see the car chases. I think they begin in very realistic terms, and where we're going to end up today is very unrealistic, but that's just the nature of the beast. Our audiences are expecting more and more.
Action.
Yes.
And because we had to edit this down, one of my favorite parts of that chase scene is the very beginning, where they're following Steve McQueen, and then he disappears, and so they're driving on, and then all of a sudden his car comes up over a hill into their rearview mirror, and then they fasten their seat belts, and away we go. That's just a classic sequence there.
In our next film, we have The Italian Job, which this is actually, there's been a remake of this that a lot of our viewers may have seen. This is the original. This is 1969 with Michael Caine. And this is a film about some thieves who are going to steal gold to try to, besides set the record, I believe this is going to be the biggest heist in history when they pull it off, but they also want it to boost the economy in the UK. At the time it was $4 million in gold, which I did an inflation calculator and found out that would be about $26 million today. So still not very much money, but in the movie they make it seem like it's a very, very large amount.
And of course, they've got Benny Hill in there, who at that point was at his peak in Great Britain and in this country on PBS, watching his shows with all his racy humor and so forth.
And that was definitely
no pun intended, but accepted.
That was definitely a big part of this movie. It was a kind of a more comedic view at this car chase, action-packed. It has a lot of slapstick, a lot of comedy in it, and we'll see some of that in the scene because just the way the film is edited and the music that they use, it just kind of keeps that light tone throughout.
And if I could toss that in, the music is by Quincy Jones, who was also at his peak. He was influencing a lot of other people, other composers with the type of music. He was that funk and all this other music that was fusing together for him. So he really made some changes in what music was going to be like for almost a decade.
And this probably made the Mini Cooper a huge, huge hit.
As it is now.
Yes. Well, let's take a look at The Italian Job and see what we're talking about. I think the most impressive thing to me about this particular car chase sequence is the fact there are so many drivers. Everything we're going to see today is pretty much, like hero villain, two cars maybe chasing one another, or if there's other cars, they're cued at certain times to come in. And this entire sequence has 3 Mini Coopers, and then they also bring in, you know, everybody that's chasing them. So the amount of choreography that had to go into this was probably astounding.
Yeah.
And it was really impressive to see at the time. And all the places they go to, I think, is really what makes it. I mean, they're jumping rooftops. There's stuff we had to cut out where they drive on top of a stadium.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just insane, impossible. But it was, I mean, it's not so impossible. I mean, they did it. They obviously did it with the cars. So it's not, you know, CG like you would do today. It's really impressive.
I'd like to take a moment to point out that the DP for this, the cinematographer, was Douglas Slocum, who works very closely with Steven Spielberg. Raiders of the Lost Ark. He's responsible for the photography for E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And what's unique about him, just a little sideline, he doesn't work with a light meter, which is almost a Bible for
especially shooting
DPs.
film. Yeah, nowadays you can get away with it because you can look instantly and see if you messed up, but not back then. Well, let's go ahead and jump into our last film for this episode. We're going to do 2 episodes, so there will be a part 2, so be sure to check that out. But at the tail end of this one today is going to be Vanishing Point from 1971, so let's take a look at that. I think Vanishing Point is probably the quintessential car chase film of all these that we've done. It is I mean, wall-to-wall car chase. The entire film is him driving from coast to coast, trying to, I don't want to give anything away, but watch Vanishing Point. I had not seen it prior to this. It's amazing. And it has a huge influence on a film we're going to review in part 2 of this coming up. So be sure to check out part 2. But is there anything you want to say about the previous films before we get out of here?
Well, I hope everybody will take a chance to go and see some of these films, particularly Thunder Road. It's such a, well, an early iconic car chase, really. It's just a big one. And then Grand Prix, of course, is a race. Obviously, it's racing, but they're chasing somebody, the guy in the lead at least, okay? But all the preparation that went into those cars go into all the cars that we're talking about. You know, you're talking about the preparation for Thunder Road with the little, the oil slick. The cars that in the Italian Job, you don't want to try these at home. You don't want to jump, you know, you don't want to do this at home. Your car's not designed for that. But I would like to point out too that some of these directors of photography, wish we could spend a little more time with them because
Yeah, Vanishing Point, John Alonzo, Scarface, Chinatown, Harold and Maude. I mean,
there are 3 movies that people need to see right now.
Huge resume.
And so, obviously, we're not going to hit all the car chases. So somebody out there that's watching say, well, why did they do Smokey and the Bandit? That's a big car chase. It's a
Blues
hoot.
Brothers. We talked about it. We talked about it.
Cannonball Run. I mean, the Blues Brothers and the Lego chase scene.
Yeah.
You know, so we would just like to really promote an interest in what's happening on the screen and seeing more of these films.
Yeah, I mean, especially Grand Prix. If you can watch Grand Prix, like we said earlier, I really think that the cinematography in that had a huge influence on how actual professional auto racing is now shot today. If you watch it, you'll know. And Le Mans too.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
both films really heavily influenced. I think if you turn on your actual television and just watch some, whether it's Formula One or stock car, they're using the same shots, the same, and because they create action, they create suspense, and they make you a part of the race.
Absolutely. It's been fun to put this all together, quite frankly, and I look forward to us doing some more.
Oh yeah. Part 2 is going to be great. Be sure and stay tuned, because in part 2 we're going to go over 5 more iconic car chase films and show you some more great films that hopefully are going to intrigue you to make you want to see them if you haven't already. But if you have any questions, be sure to contact me. You can email me at realtalkjohn@gmail.com. Give us your favorite car chase scenes. Let us know what you think is probably the best. This, by no means, is a list of the best. This is just what we could get our hands on that we thought they were great movies that had great chase scenes. So, Norm, thank you again for being here.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. And we will see you again next time on the next installment of Real Talk Car Chases.